If slavery never happened, then you would be in a grass hut.
Huh?
Right? Well, we need reparations. Your reparations are that you get to live in America.
Man, shut up. This is why you can't give everybody a mic. They just get on there and say anything. It don't matter.
You're welcome.
You get to have the Christian religion.
That's
live
right.
better than your ancestors.
The greatest moment in history for any brown or black country is the moment that the white man's ships arrive on your shore.
Every time reparations comes up, the conversation usually ends before it even starts. They get dismissive, defensive, or sarcastic and act like the idea of reparations is just ridiculous. What's interesting is how fast people shut this conversation down without ever really asking what reparations is or what it means. It's always framed like black people are asking for something extra instead of asking for something that was taken and never returned. So when people ask, do black people deserve reparations? What they're really asking is whether they're willing to acknowledge what was done, how long it lasted, and whether the damage was ever actually fixed. And for a lot of people, that conversation is uncomfortable because admitting that means admitting that what we have today didn't just happen naturally. It was shaped, it was enforced, and it benefited some people while harming others. A lot of people hear the word reparations and immediately imagine the government handing out checks to random black people with no explanation. And that image alone is enough to make people angry. And that's usually where the conversation stops. But reparations has never only meant cash payments. Historically, it's meant repair, compensation for harm, addressing damage that was intentionally caused and was never corrected.
What do you mean you want reparations? Our taxpayer dollars, which are mostly white people paying that, goes to, what is it? Affordable housing, government programs, EBT, scholarships, DEI, you guys getting jobs. Holy shit. Let's take all that, factor in the theft, factor in the crime, factor it in the murders, and the
question. If we're supposed to pay reparations, let's just say we are, how can you be sure that you descended from slaves if you don't even know who your dad is?
A debt is owed. You owe a debt. You have to pay it.
These people are so stupid. They're lazy, entitled. They don't even care about the issues that they're complaining about. They just want free things. They want people to pay for their food, their housing, this, that, and the other thing. Why not $1 million kajillion dollars?
This is not a new concept. This country has done it before. Native tribes receive land and settlements. Japanese Americans receive reparations for internment camps. And other countries have paid reparations to Holocaust survivors. So the idea itself isn't ridiculous. It's only crazy when black people are the ones that are being discussed. That's when people suddenly start acting like history doesn't matter anymore. What also gets ignored is that reparations doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all. Because at the end of the day, different harms require different responses. The damage done to black communities was not just physical labor. It was financial, educational, and generational. So repairing that would naturally look layered, not something simple. And people forget, reparations isn't just about fixing something on paper. It's acknowledging what actually happened. When the harm gets denied or minimized, that damage doesn't just stop. It sticks with people mentally and socially, even when those policies are technically over. One of the biggest lies that people tell is that slavery was the only issue, and once it ended, everything reset. That's not what happened. Slavery transitioned into black codes, then into convict leasing, then into sharecropping, then into Jim Crow, then into redlining, then into exclusion from unions, housing programs, and business loans, then into over-policing, mass incarceration, environmental racism, etc., etc., etc. The list really does go on and on. Each stage blocked black people from building wealth while white families were able to build it and pass it down. And that was not random, that was policy. So when someone says that was a long time ago, what they're really ignoring is how long that damage lasted and how recently some of it actually ended. You can't lock black people out of opportunities for generations, then act surprised when those effects don't disappear overnight. A lot of these systems overlap too. It wasn't one era ending clean and another one starting. Redlining existed while schools were still segregated. Mass incarceration grew right alongside housing discrimination. So the damage stacked. And even when certain policies were finally banned, the outcomes didn't just reverse overnight. Wealth, education, and access don't reset just because a law changes. Another argument people always bring up is, my family never owned slaves, so why should I be responsible?
So the taxpayers are paying for something that they never did to people who never experienced said thing. the taxpayers who are going to have to be paying all these black people were never slave owners, and the black people that are going to be receiving these reparations were never slaves.
This lady had nothing to do with slavery. She's not affected with it whatsoever. She has the same opportunities that anyone in society does.
In the 1860 census, at the very height of slavery, there were 393,975 slave owners in the U.S. That translates to about 1.2% of the population. The vast majority of American whites never owned any slaves.
Reparations isn't about personal guilt. It's collective benefit. You don't have to own slaves to benefit from a system that was built on slave labor and racial exclusion. Roads, land ownership, housing access, education, business opportunities, all of that stacks and compounds over time. At the same time, black families were legally locked out of those same systems. So the real question isn't whether someone personally did harm. It's whether the country profited while another group was intentionally held back. And the answer to that is yes. People accept collective benefit everywhere else. Nobody questions inherited wealth, legacy admissions, or family businesses passed down for generations. But when it comes to inherited disadvantage, now all of a sudden everybody wants to make it about personal responsibility. But ignoring collective benefit doesn't make it disappear. It just makes inequality look random instead of design. Whenever reparations comes up, someone always has the nerve to say, black people should just work harder and stop complaining. But what that ignores is that black people have been working hard this entire time. A lot of times harder than other people. We work harder without the same access to the reward. Hard work doesn't hit the same when you're denied loans, pushed into worse schools, paid less, over-policed, and locked out of wealth-building programs. So telling people to just work harder without acknowledging those barriers is not advice. It's just a way to dismiss the conversation without actually engaging with it. And it shifts responsibility away from the systems that cause the damage in the first place. And that mindset also assumes that effort alone determines outcomes, which isn't really how society actually works. It's tons of people that put in a lot of effort and that work really hard, but will never get to the same place as other people. Connections, timing, and capital matter just as much as effort, and those were systematically restricted. So when people repeat work harder without context, they're just signaling that they don't want to deal with the history behind it. A lot of the pushback from reparations comes from fear. Fear of losing something, fear of accountability, and fear of realizing that success was not purely earned. For some people, reparations feels like punishment, even though they were never personally targeted by the original injustice. But repairing damage isn't punishment, it's responsibility.
The point is that it's historically incoherent to pretend that America has some kind of special guilt for slavery, because when it comes down to it, guilt is shared by every country.
Yeah, obviously I really wish that didn't happen, but you forget, you guys sold yourselves. You weren't like kidnapped off of your island from your huts. And like 1% of early Americans owned slaves, including Black Americans. I know you're not used to your victim card being declined, but you have reached your limit. And genuinely, if you're so upset here, if we are so evil here, why don't you go back to Africa instead of complaining about us bringing you here so much?
Apparently history only matters when it's convenient now. 1 to 2 million white Europeans were raped and enslaved and kidnapped by Barbary pirates. Right, then the question starts coming in, well, are you a direct descendant of what happened? Did it personally hurt your credit score? So now we care about qualifiers, right? But when it's time for modern day reparations, suddenly none of that matters.
This is the new pathetic angle that they're trying. Instead of just being like, you know what, we hear you guys, we understand, let's try to figure out a solution to make this fair for everybody. Let's try to right the wrongs of our ancestors. They're bringing out the Barbary slave trade and trying to compare it to the transatlantic slave trade. It's pathetic, man. And I'm gonna make a whole other video about this, so I don't want to get in too deep into it right now. The inequality that we see today didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built, reinforced, and consistently protected over time. And if something was built, that means it can be repaired. And ignoring that doesn't make it disappear. It just allows the gap to keep growing. There's also a fear that once reparations are acknowledged, it opens the door to other uncomfortable questions about fairness in education, housing, and employment. Because once one lie falls apart, all of the other lies start to get real shaky. And most of the time when someone calls reparations unfair, what they're really saying is they're more worried about what they think that they might lose than the real harm that actually happened. At the end of the day, it's a selfish way of thinking. Reparations doesn't have to mean one big check sent to everybody. And in my personal opinion, it wouldn't make sense to do that. All that would do is eventually funnel the money right back into the same place that we didn't want it to be in the first place. It needs to stay within the community. It could look like targeted housing programs, our own institutions, debt relief, education funding, business grants, or direct investment into Black communities that were intentionally drained in the first place. The exact form matters less than the intention behind it. The goal is to address specific harm that was done that was never properly corrected.
I 100% agree that the United States owes the Black community reparations, and this is why. It's not about white people owing Black people. It's not about white people being punished for the sins of our ancestors. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's about white people standing in solidarity with a community that has suffered grave, egregious injustices at the hands of the United States government. But first, we must decenter ourselves in this conversation, alienate ourselves from our privilege, and hold the United States institutions and systems accountable for the wrongs that they never rectified. From slavery to Black codes, to convict leasing, to Jim Crow segregation, to anti-Black housing policies, to mass incarceration, we have never rectified our wrongs as a country.
A lot of people want to argue about the details before they ever agree on the principle. And that's how the conversation always gets stuck right where it's at. Before acknowledging responsibility is just a way to stall progress. Every repair process starts with admitting that damage was done in the first place. And without repair, inequality doesn't just fade away. It keeps reproducing itself no matter how much time passes. The real question is whether the country is willing to admit that harm was done intentionally, that the damage lasted for generations, and that simply ending the policy did not undo the consequences. Reparations isn't about handouts, it's about repair. And until that gets acknowledged honestly, this conversation will keep getting shut down before it actually even starts. Avoiding the conversation doesn't protect unity. It protects denial. And repair isn't only about the past. It's about the kind of future that people are willing to build once the conversation is actually on the table.